Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode number 459 of the podcast, and it is the 8th of November 2019 as I record this in Bath on a very wintry day. It's pretty cold outside, but I am snug in my sound booth with my sound blankets, which definitely serve multiple purposes. So today I'm talking about how to write your darkness with David Wright, one of the co-writers at Sterling & Stone, known to many of you as Dave from Johnny, Sean and Dave at the Story Studio podcast, previously the SPP or self-publishing podcast. So I've known Dave and Johnny and Sean, I guess, for, a decade now, because we were some of the early people in the indie days. And so it's really great to check in with people that you've known for this long. And they've all been on the show and multiple times over the last decade. And it's always kind of interesting to see where people go next. Dave has not done a nonfiction book before, so really great to talk to him. Now, we are talking about turning your darkness into stories. I guess for some people, I'll give a trigger warning. I think personally we should be facing anything that we have in terms of issues. And many of us as writers, we actually write to heal ourselves and also to heal others. So obviously with Dave, we don't get into too much detail, but I guess a bit like the episode I did with Michael Brent Collings on depression, there are some things we talk about in here that, we talk about as writers going through mental health difficulties, life challenges, and turning those into our writing. So that is coming up. In publishing and book marketing news, very excited because Findaway Voices have just announced that they have added keywords as a new metadata field. Now, you might think this is not exciting. But I tell you, if you haven't done audiobooks yet, one of the most frustrating things is discoverability. If you are an audiobook listener, you will find on the apps that you use that there are very few categories. And what has happened, obviously, to places like Amazon and Kobo over the years and Apple Books is that they have added more and more subcategories. And this is what we need in audiobooks. But also we need keywords. Now, keywords help with people finding us for discoverability. And this is even harder for audiobooks than it is for ebooks and print. So Findaway Voices say keywords help listeners find your audiobooks in searches. This new metadata field is optional, but an effective way to increase the visibility of your work on some retailers, because of course not all of them are going to use those keywords, but I will be going in and adding keywords to all of my audiobooks. I haven't done it yet because I just got this update. So very excited. Again, links in the show notes as ever. But if you do publish wide for audio on Findaway, then you can now add keywords. So in futurist stuff, I've talked about this a number of times because it's been a sort of staged release, but OpenAI has released the full version of GPT-2, the AI text generator. Now, as I've told you before, you can check it out at talk2transformer.com. And all you do on that site, talk2transformer.com, is you can put in a few sentences. Now, I put in some sentences of my own books. So I've been trying this multiple times and it has definitely got better. So I just tried it literally just before this with a couple of things. I put in the final few lines of Map of Plagues and clicked generate. Now, a good idea is to click generate a couple of times and have a look. And it generates like a paragraph of text. There might be some dialogue, there might be some other things, some narrative, some whatever. And it's pretty interesting in that it's not complete gobbledygook. It is not necessarily usable. Well, it's definitely not usable as is for fiction, but it's a creative prompt. The first one it came up with actually made me laugh out loud. I was like, really? That is incredible. And it gave me some interesting ideas. In the same way that when I do research behind my fiction, I might read a book and I'll be highlighting things, and I won't use that line as is, unless I'm using it as a quote, but I might read something, let's say about a cave, and I might then use a couple of words of this description to spark my own description of a cave, or decide that I'll put that as a setting in my book. So I think this is quite similar for fiction in that it was more like a creative writing prompt, but definitely interesting. Nonfiction, though, was actually scary in that I put in some lines about productivity from my next book on productivity for authors, which is coming out in December and available right now in the NaNoWriMo story bundle. But what it generated about productivity, and I press the button maybe 4 times, it was absolutely usable as is. That was what was scary. It made sense. It was in the right voice. One of its generations was like a bulleted list of things that were actually good ideas. And it was like, okay then. Now, as I explained back in the AI episode in episode 437, which was only like July. But this kind of text generation is already used by journalists in the sports and finance industries in particular. But also the first AI-generated textbook has been published. And what's interesting about GPT-2 is they've trained it on certain, data sets. But I would love to train a GPT-2 style algorithm on thecreativepenn.com, since I've published millions of words now, and also my own books. I've also published, I haven't actually counted all my words, but I'm definitely up to 1 million. I've got like 32 books. And that's just the ones I've told you about. I do have some early books that I withdrew from the market. We all have practice books, just happens. But definitely, I would love to have this model, as I've said before, to generate stuff for me in my writing voice. This could be research, this could be idea generation, it could even be first draft material that then I could edit into something that other people might want to read. So this stuff is fascinating from a copyright law perspective, but I'm not a lawyer. It's just something I'm interested in. If you are a coder and you love the GPT-2 stuff, I'm definitely interested in this. You can always email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. If you listen to the interview I did with Grant Faulkner on NaNoWriMo, we did mention NaNoWriMo, which is about generating a novel in a month. And they actually, people doing NaNoWriMo have an area on GitHub where they post information about this and their code. And I just checked it, and they mentioned using the API, which is think of it as a sort of data feed from fanfiction.net as a way to train story text. So this is really interesting because, of course, fan fiction is, you're not meant to be able to do fan fiction because those characters they're copyrighted by the owners and that type of thing. But lots of people write fan fiction, and that, of course, became 50 Shades of Grey is probably the most famous fan fiction that turned into a juggernaut of its own. But fascinating to kind of hear that they are training models on fan fiction. So I know that some of you right now are feeling uncomfortable, and I come up against these uncomfortable feelings all the time. Part of my mission really is to almost tackle some of these uncomfortable things before you have to. And this is why. And the reason I'm covering all this is because I think we have to tackle this. I will be having an interview in early 2020 around copyright, and hopefully we'll talk about, more and more we have to talk about the potential of copyright in an AI text generation world. But I wanted to let's just stop a minute and examine, why do we feel uncomfortable about this? And so I came up with some questions. I think that we feel uncomfortable because it's cheating, in inverted commas. Let's put it in inverted commas. Is it cheating to use a text generation algorithm to create a first draft? Is that cheating? Do you think it's not enough work, for example? Is it cheating to use a keyboard and a computer to type fast? Or is it cheating to dictate using a recorder plus speech to text generation? Is that cheating? Is it cheating to listen to audiobooks on 2x speed and call it reading? Is it cheating that some authors use paid ads to sell more books? Is it cheating to use Amazon KDP to self-publish a book for free when a traditionally published author has had to go through a long process of selection only to be published on the exact same platform for lower royalties? So those are some questions for you to think about, because when I used that word cheating to kind of come up with a few scenarios, these are some of the other things that people say are cheating. For example, lots of people say to me, oh, you didn't read that book because you listened to it on audiobook. And I'm like, no, it's my brain. And audio is an input method. So anyway, all of these things are using technology for what we do as independent authors in a technology-assisted world. And I think GPT-2 is part of the next wave of disruption. I think it won't be called GPT-2. In fact, natural language generation is what the area is known as, NLG. So if you are interested in this, and I think we have to be, and I'm not a programmer, really important that I am not a programmer. Yes, I have worked in technology, but more on the kind of functional consultant side, helping people understand how technology might impact their job. And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to do with us now. So in my mind, we use all the tools we can to make our life possible and scalable. So I'm right this minute, of course, I am using a microphone, I'm using an iPad, I'm using a laptop, I'm using software on my computer. So it's not just me sitting here talking to myself. I'm using tools. And then I'm using the internet to get it to you, and apps that people have built. This is the way we do business now. So I want you to not restrain yourself and not shut down when we start talking about this type of thing, because we have to expand our possibilities and engage with what's happening with AI so we can shape the conversation rather than be impacted by it years down the track when we will have no power. And this idea of power is so important and something that I care very much about. I do believe in the empowered creative, the empowered author who can make decisions, informed decisions about their creative life. Of course, you may decide that you much prefer handwriting your books in on handmade paper with a quill or an ink or something. And awesome, go with it. But you will have to put that out into the world at some point. So we all use tools, so let's not shut down the possibilities of future tools as things change. So that's my futurist segment today. So my personal update, hopefully you can tell I am back up to speed. I do go from, sort of top speed to zero. And I did get sick in Vegas. I am finally recovered from sickness and jet lag. And it was a fantastic trip, brain-wise and intellectual stimulation-wise. But it was not a good trip health-wise or sleep-wise. And I need a lot of sleep. I think for my brain to definitely for my brain to work effectively, I need sleep. And so jet lag always just kills me. So it takes a week of flying, to fly into Vegas from the UK, it's 8 hours difference. So it's basically a night's sleep. So it takes a week, let's say an hour a day, which is what jet lag does. And yes, I've tried melatonin and it just doesn't work. It gives me like a hangover. I feel like I have a hangover, so my brain doesn't work, whereas I'd much rather just have a natural sleep cycle that's off kink. Anyway, yes, I'm back. I'm recovered. And I went through, I typed up all my notes from the business masterclass with Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rusch, and it was really fantastic. I typed up a lot of notes and I thought about, I was going to do a separate show on it, but I can't. It is too much. And I haven't fully imbibed everything. I need this time to percolate. This was big stuff. This was not just, hey, go to a class and learn how to write better characters or how to do, some ads or things this was nothing short term, basically. This was all long-term mindset and business ideas that will change the way I do business. And, hopefully as Kris and Dean bring this information to the world, it will also help you think about your business differently. I have thought a lot about what I want to spend my time on, what I value in terms of my lifestyle, what is truly evergreen, the value of intellectual property. And so I'll be bringing these things into my year-end roundup and my goals for 2020, which I post on 31st of December and the 1st of January every year. I do those. Brilliantly, though, because I was like, what can I tell you that would be interesting to some of you who want to know more? So fantastically, Kris Rusch has posted an article. She has been writing, she's now done 16 blog posts on rethinking the writing business. So you can go and read all of them. But this one, which is number 16, is called Paradigm Shift. And essentially talks about one of the moments that was transformational. We did a role play. Well, we didn't. We watched a role play exercise around licensing, and it really did change the perspective of the authors in the room to kind of realize that the power dynamic shifts when you do IP licensing in the right way. And so I will put the links in the show notes, or you can go to kriswrights.com, KRIS Wrights.com, and look for the business musings of, I guess, the end of 2019. But a quick quote, Kris says, "How do you make the paradigm shift from powerless writer to powerful owner of IP? The first shift has to happen in your own mind. Just because you haven't yet licensed much of that IP doesn't mean that the IP lacks value. The IP is waiting there for you to work with it, inside of publishing and out." There's so much in just these few sentences, and if you are just starting out, you need to understand what IP is, what is intellectual property, and what that means as a writer. And once you start down that track, once you start to understand IP and what we create as writers, you start to think, whoa, okay, this, like I did, this is a brilliant business. This is fantastic. And there's so much that you can create in terms of, we create a book, but we also create value and income for potentially our lifetime and 70 years after we die, according to copyright law. So if you don't understand IP and you're wondering why I'm talking about it, then you kind of need to go back to the basics. This is stuff that writers are not educated on. There are many reasons why they're not educated in it, but I think, again, it's about power. It's a bit like money. Most of us are not educated on money. And again, it's about power. And if you want power, you need to get educated. I think I have a lot of things going on right now. In fact, I know I have a lot of things going on right now. My brain is kind of dealing with Frankfurt and then Vegas, and a lot of the stuff that is coming up for me is around shifting the business. And I know I've been talking about this for a while, probably a whole year actually, because you get to this point in your business where you've met your goals and you really are still searching for the next goal. And I'm still there. I've met all my goals and all my financial goals and a lot of my creative goals already. I never thought I would write 32 books. And I still have many more. So on that personal stuff, it is November and I am doing NaNoWriMo. Now I say I am doing it because I have actually written 6,000 words this week, but I am well behind already. And that is because, of course, I was sick, recovering, doing admin. My husband also just got back from New Zealand. We haven't seen each other for almost a month and we spend like every day together. So spending time together is a priority for a happy marriage. And so I am favouring time with my husband than I am doing NaNoWriMo. So I also have another problem, which is I normally finish a book before I start another one. And at the moment I have the book on audio for authors, which is, I've got about 25,000 words of that one, and it's well structured already. I also have plot ideas down for the next Arcane novel. And I'm also attempting to do Map of the Impossible, which feels impossible at the moment. And I understand the creative process. I know that if I keep going back to the page, it will emerge. So I need to take some of my own advice, declutter my brain, and decide what I want to do in the next, let's say the next month before I move into December party mode. In England, we tend to, around Christmas, well, maybe everywhere, we have lots of sociable things. So I did have a tip for you this week. Again, I know this is a rather long intro, but I feel like I haven't been talking to you much over the last few weeks because of the various trips. So I did have a little tip from writing this week. I had a new character arise. There was a need for a new character, and also I know, I kind of had an idea of something I wanted to write and this character would fit. So, and I had a name just, immediately popped into my mind. So I started writing with this name, and then I remembered, I have to use my character list. And this is something I learned. I have done this wrong in other books. And I have not really realised it until I've done audio. So essentially, you have to put your characters in a character list in alphabetical order in order to see your own biases as a writer. So what you're going to see, first of all, is that a lot of the names start with the same letter. For some reason, when we reach for a name, often we will reach for something similar. And you will mess this up. So in one of my books, I had Jenna and Jamie. And in one place in the book that made it all the way through to the live version, I got the names wrong. And also, it's just too easy to type the wrong name. So having characters where their names start with a different letter is a really good thing. Also, that they sound different. So again, I have a lot of women's names, for example, end in a. Joanna, Sienna, that type of thing. So it's good to kind of mix them up around that so that they sound different. And what I discovered when I wrote this character name in my list is, oh dear, that name is not going to work, because when I read it aloud, if I have a scene between this character and that character and I'm reading it aloud, it's going to sound similar, even if the names begin with a different letter. So that was good, because I then had to completely change my character name. And for me, names are really important, and I spend a lot of time on names. So I had to go back to my drawing board and kind of figure out, all right, so I have a lot of, all my characters are multicultural. And so I knew I wanted to have some Armenian in this character. So I was looking at Armenian names and trying to figure out how I could do that. And, a name that would have meaning, but also would be right in a sort of writing in a character background kind of way. So anyway, those are just some things around character names. Put them in a list in alphabetical order. Right, I also have 3 books out in German this week. Oh yeah, I've also been busy with that. I'm going to do a separate show on all my thoughts and tips over that. But yes, I have books in German now, which is cool. So thanks for all your emails and tweets this week. A couple. Tenzin says, I love the show with Vikram Chandra as I can relate to the cultural reference discussed. I grew up watching Bollywood films and now living in the UK, still haven't changed my interest. Sacred Games is on my list to watch now. Fantastic. Oh, and Andrew Northwell says that he finds the show helpful. I wouldn't have known about Nano or where to start if it wasn't for you. Just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And it's so funny. I'm talking about this next week. So next week I've got Mark Dawson on the show, and yes, we're talking about some ad stuff, but we also have quite a cool discussion about how some days it feels like we're in an echo chamber and we think everyone knows everything, but they don't. And we really are almost at the beginning of this journey as independents. Also this week, there was quite a hilarious discussion about family and friends never reading or liking our books. And it made me laugh because it's totally true. Like, my husband is my best friend, but he reads huge fantasy books, like as in, doorstop size. That's the type of book he likes. And even the fantasy books I've written, he's like, yeah, too short, not even my thing, And you have to come to terms with the fact that your books are not going to appeal generally to your family and friends, even though you want them to. So just a couple of comments there. Julie Cordiner says, I'd settle for even a bit of interest in the fact that I write. Never mind loving the result. Jennifer Boller says, ain't that the truth? I gave my sister one of my books and she still hadn't finished it a year later. Glad to hear I'm not the only one. And Rachel Thompson on Twitter says, this is why I coach writers to write what scares you, because they're usually so worried about what their family and friends will say or think, when the truth is they won't read it anyway. And I like that quote because that leads into the discussion with Dave, because we talk about fear of judgment, which I really have had to deal with my book Desecration. That book percolated for many years and really only came up. I was only able to write it when I sort of could get to grips with fear of judgment and also self-censorship. So we self-censor a lot when we fear other people reading our stuff. And there are lots of ways to deal with that. Pen names are obviously one of them. Don't tell anyone is another one. So fantastic. So those are some of the tweets and emails. You can always tweet me at The Creative Penn with a double N. Right, so today's show is sponsored by my courses for writers. Since it's NaNoWriMo, I thought I would mention that I have a course on how to write a novel. And, I always need to revisit the basics, and it's good for me to look at how I do this every time and have to kind of remind myself of the journey. But I do have 17 novels, so I do know how to do this. And although, so the course is open anytime. It is an evergreen course, so you don't have to be doing NaNoWriMo to take advantage of it. Is it your dream to write a novel, but you just don't know where to start? Have you started writing only to run out of ideas? Are you suffering from self-doubt about whether you're good enough to write a novel? And are you overwhelmed by all the information and craft books that you are trying to learn? Do you want to strip everything back to basics and learn a step-by-step process to writing your novel? If yes, this course might be for you. Carol says of the course, I have a full draft of my novel in progress now, and I could not have done it without you. Your class gave me a roadmap and resources that would have taken me years to find, plus you earned my trust along the way. And Jim says, the information is outstanding, laid out in a perfect order. It is a roadmap that takes you from self-doubt and confusion to typing the end. You can go to thecreativepenn.com/learn to find out more, and all my courses are there. So thecreativepenn.com/learn. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, which is I just had my hosting bill for the year. I pay annually and it's like, whoo, transcription and editing. But my time in creating the show is sponsored by my patrons. Thank you so much if you support the show on Patreon. It means so much to me that you do that. Thanks to new patrons, Ishani Sen, Dawn Starks, Ida Umphers, Heather Button, and Dee Proudlove. In fact, there's a few great names in that list there, isn't there? I really do appreciate your support on Patreon. Like the tweets and emails, it demonstrates you enjoy the show and want it to continue. And you can support the show with just a couple of dollars a month, and you'll get the extra monthly Q&A audio plus the backlist. So tons more audio fun. You can support the show at patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, let's get into the interview. David Wright is the co-author of 30-plus novels spanning horror, thriller, and sci-fi. He's also a podcaster at the Story Studio podcast and one of the 3 co-founders of Sterling & Stone Story Studio with Sean Platt and Johnny B. Truant, both of whom have been on this show several times. Dave has a non-fiction book out, Into the Darkness, Hook Your Readers Without Getting Lost in the Dark, which I am really super excited about. So welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you for having me back. I'm shocked that anybody ever asked me to return.
I think this is your 3rd appearance on the Creative Penn in the last decade.
That's about as often as my wife wants to see me. So that sounds about right. 3 times per decade.
Oh, no, that's cool. And of course, we have met in person once at the summit a few years ago, which was great. And I guess, we've talked about writing dark things before, but I think you have managed to avoid writing nonfiction up to this point. So why this book and why now?
Basically, for a long time, like Sean and Johnny, they like teaching. I don't particularly like it. And they both said, people want to hear stuff from you. I'm like, nah. And to me, like, I think of, real writers in quotation marks, like Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Clive Barker, other people I grew up reading. And yeah, I want to hear what they have to say about writing, but not what I have to say particularly. And two things kind of changed that. One was the Smarter Artist Summit that we did last year. I spoke on stage and told a rather depressing story about how, there were two times in my life where, I was going in the wrong direction. And one of them, my best friend had I may as well just tell a story. It's easier than just referencing it. Okay, so back in 1996, I was pretty much stagnating. I was working midnight shifts at a gas station. I lived in an apartment with another friend of mine, and my best friend at the time, Todd, had moved on. He was out of the Navy. He was working at a bar, making a ton of money, and he kept telling me, we were like best friends growing up, and he kept telling me, come move with me, get out of your rut, do something different, do something with your life. And he was like the one person that actually believed in me becoming a writer, like before anybody. He's like, you're going to be the next Stephen King. Mm. So he kept asking me to come, and I was like, I always had excuses not to. I was kind of stuck in a rut, like I said. And the thing about it is, when I met Todd, he was like this nerdy, dorky kid, and he got picked on, and I sort of, stuck up for him. And we had this dynamic where, like, I was kind of the cool one, he's kind of the dorky one. And when he came back to visit me in February of '96, he was like totally changed. First of all, he looked like a male model now rather than a skinny, very weak kid. And also he was just, he had confidence and charisma, and, he wanted to go to clubs and, meet women and stuff. It's like a completely different person to me. Like, we were both like these geeky dorks playing Dungeons and Dragons, and now he's this cool ass dude. And there was a part of me that, because when he was criticizing me, he was trying to bring me up, but I saw it as him putting me down, like he was looking down on me, and it really annoyed the crap out of me. So what happened was, he left. He left to go back home in February. And we had this like kind of this argument, and he was like, you know what, if you want to waste your life, whatever. And I was just so mad at him. I didn't even walk him downstairs to go home. And I didn't think much about it because we would go months without talking, especially when he was in the Navy. And it never really meant anything. Like, when we saw each other, it was just like, reuniting old friends, and we picked up right where we left off. Not a big deal. And I figured, okay, this will go away. We'll forget about it. Not a big deal. I never called to apologize. Never really thought much of it. And then on April 1st of the same year, I got a call from, or April 2nd, got a call from his aunt, whom I never even met. I don't even know how she had my number. And she told me that he died in a car accident. And that pretty much destroyed me for quite a while. And I was just full of regret for all the things that wouldn't happen now. I mean, we had so many plans. We were going to, like, you know, rule the world, a couple of geeks. And everything just changed. I became depressed, and I just fell into this darkness. And, you know, if he thought I was in a bad place before, I was really in a bad place then. And it took me a long time to come out of it. And what happened was, in 2 years ago, I went to the Smart Artist Summit that, you know, we were doing every year for a while. And Sean and Johnny, after every conference or summit, whatever the hell we're calling it, after every one of them, we have a dinner, and we talk about, you know how it went, where we are, and, you know, what we want to do the next year. Sean's a very he likes to think about these things. I'm just kind of like this chaotic mess, and I just go wherever you point me. So we were talking, and Sean's like, you know, you're really not keeping up your end of the thing. It's kind of the conversation I had with Todd. And he's like, you know, you're worse than when we met. You're missing deadlines. It took like a year to write this one book. Just a lot of the things that needed to be pointed out to me that I wasn't picking up on. So it was a moment, and it reminded me a lot of the moment with Todd. Like, I have a choice. I have a choice here. There's two paths I can go. One of them is to stay myself in, you know, live with my fear and anxiety and just let it rule me, or I can take a chance on myself. And this time I made a different choice, because I already saw where the other choice, you know, brought me. Not that I think Sean was going to die if I rejected him, but it just reminded me of where I was and where I needed to be. And it was a wake up call. And, you know, a year later, was this year at the summit, February, you know, I went on stage and told that story. And since then, you know, I've done really well. Like, I'm writing a lot more. I lost a bunch of weight. I'm down under 300 for the first time in forever. For, you know, comparison's sake, you know, I topped out at almost 400 at one point. And for a long time, I've been hovering around 340. And right now I'm down to 272.
Oh,
so
congratulations. I know that's a big thing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I told this story on stage, and I talked about this. I talked a little bit about bullying and stuff, and the stuff I dealt with. And I remember, you know, why I was talking about it. It just kind of came up. And afterwards, all these people came up to me, and they, like, thanked me for sharing the story. Like, they found me, you know, I was off to the side, you know, when other people were speaking. They would come up to me and tell me, you know, how much it meant that they shared, and how, you know, they had similar situations. They had a similar point in their life, or they were bullied. One guy was like, you know, this really alpha male sort of guy, like the kind of guy I think, you know, never had a problem in his life that he couldn't kick its ass. And he came up and he told me, like, you know, he went through the same stuff. And I was like, wow, I was just, you know, shocked by how many people had similar experiences to me. And those two things made me, Sean basically said, you know, yeah, you know, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, all those people, they can write a nonfiction book, but they can't write your story and connect with the people that you connect with, that you're like. So that's what made me write this. That's a very long way to get around to it.
No, but I think well,
it's over now.
No, it's a really good illustration, because it's funny. You started off by saying, I don't like teaching, but what what you've done in the book, I mean, there are some writing tips, let's face it, you know, there are writing tips, but your point is you're sharing your experience. There's a lot of what I would say memoir in this book, which I think is the only way now to write nonfiction. Like, you can't just say, write this, do that, you know, and I think your idea of what teaching is was probably wrong. And, you know, what Sean knows about you and what I have recognized in you is that you teach people by sharing your stories, you know? So
yeah, but there's that negative voice inside of me, like, you know, the kid that was picked on and sat in the back of the class, and that kid's like, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Nobody cares. Just move on. And it's hard to get over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course, and many people don't get over it. But in the book, so one of the quotes from the book, I've read it, it's fantastic. You say that it might very well be necessary for my well-being to write dark books. So, I mean, you've hinted, obviously, Todd's death, you've mentioned, bullying. But how has writing actually helped you through this? How has it helped you make those changes or help you deal with life?
Well, I think it offers a catharsis, a way to deal with, feelings that are beyond my power, beyond my control. I mean, the world is an insane place and horrible things happen all the time. And it's really hard to wrap your head around how it can make any sense at all. And it doesn't. It's random, chaotic, and it's hard. And I also, I deal with OCD and anxiety, and that's a big part of my headspace. Like that makes it even more hard because I tend to ruminate on horrible things. And I need some outlet. And when I was younger, reading stories kind of transported me like an escape out of, the real world and into this other world where things made a little more sense. And, sometimes the good people won in the end. And I needed that. Even if it's a fiction, I needed it. I needed it to get through. And now writing, it's about, dealing with dark things, but also trying to find the hope, trying to find the light in the darkness to hold on to. And I don't know, for me, I just find that writing about it helps me to see the good things in the world as well.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I wondered, let's come back to almost a definition of dark, because it's funny. I mean, I read horror, but I don't watch horror movies. I find that they do affect me in ways, whereas I kind of devour horror novels, but only specific types of horror novels. Like you mentioned Dean Koontz. Have you read his latest Jane Hawk series?
No, I
just brilliant.
I haven't read them in a while. It's hard for me to read the horror stuff while also writing. But
no, fair enough. But my point, I guess, is Jane Hawk. They could be called thrillers, sci-fi / horror. I mean, to me, the horror side is, as you mentioned, it's fighting darkness with a ray of hope, and it's not. But a lot of people seem to think that horror is just sort of torture porn and lots of gore, which is not what I like at all. So there's a lot of death, to be fair, but not in that torture porn to me is not the definition of horror. So maybe you could talk about, like, when you talk about writing darkness, what does that mean to you? What does the genre mean?
First off, I've never really cared for a lot of horror movies that do fall into that torture porn category. They seem to be, they're titillating for, shock's value, whatever that is, and that doesn't really do anything for me. There's no real characters you can root for, any of that. So I don't really enjoy that stuff. It's just too bleak and dismal. As far as the things, I tend to write about the things that scare me. And when I was younger, I would write about monsters and like supernatural threats. But, I had a kid, and that kind of changed in me. You get new fears when you have a child. You worry about your kid, for one. And you see the world a little bit differently. You also see things you never really thought about as dangers. So I tend to write about things that, scare the hell out of me. Bullying is, something from my own youth, but kidnapping and all the horrible things that, you see in the news, you think about a little bit differently when you're a parent. And I write up a bunch of different stuff. I mean, pretty much anything that's ever terrified me. Our thrillers are more straight up, in that area, somebody being kidnapped. There's murder, obviously. But the sci-fi supernatural stuff, we have monsters creeping in and stuff like that. But typically anything that, affects me in some way that I don't want to think about. I force myself to think about to deal with it. Catharsis.
Yeah, that forcing us through. And I mean, it's interesting because I really came up against, when I wrote my novel Desecration, which I call a crime thriller, but, has some aspects of horror in. And I mean, the title, it does have, dark stuff in. And I came up against my own fear of judgment that, I'm quite a happy little soul. I know you were quite surprised when I told you some of the things that I write. And
yes, our dinner conversation was one of my favorites ever, actually.
Yeah, and I do have a dark side, even though I'm quite this sunny, happy other side. So this fear of judgment, I mean, I still come up against this all the time. How do we not self-censor? How do we, is there a line we shouldn't cross, or should we just let it go?
I think the line's different for everybody. For me, I think you don't want to. I get what you're saying about not wanting to be judged, because I've met people and they're like, "What do? You write horror?" Oh, wow. Okay, there's something wrong with you. Like they think the absolute worst. Like you enjoy watching bodies being ripped apart or something like that. And I'm actually pretty damn squeamish with stuff like that. I think the line is where you're not celebrating. For instance, we have a series called No Justice, which is like a vigilante thriller series, and there's some pretty dark subjects in there. There's a child abduction, rape, and stuff like that, and we tell from the hero and the villain's POV because we want you to be in their heads, and it's a fine line where you want to write about a child abductor in a way that someone can be in their head, but also not where you're glamorizing it. Like, yes, I'm pro child murder. So it's you want to write about for me, I always want to write the villain in a way that you can almost see why they are the good guy in their own story or the good girl. You don't agree with what they're doing, but you know why. You see what happened in their life that led them to that way. And I think that to me is important for like really good fiction. And I think, books and movies and TV are doing that a lot more these days, where the villain is more shades of gray and you see, what they are versus, how, their life could have been different, but something really bad happened and it turned them into the monster that they are. And I like to kind of do that, but not in a way that, glamorizes it. I think that's a tough one because, right now that movie, The Joker's coming out. And the news is currently worried about, well, is that going to cause, other incel guys that, idolize the Joker to go out and, shoot up places and stuff? Because that happens a lot, way too often. And it's tricky to make art in this day where you want to write about something and bring it to light, but not in a way that glamorizes it and gives people something to aspire to or motivates them to do something horrible. I don't know if I've explained it well at all, but it is a fine line. I think just don't glamorize it. I don't know. That's my feeling on it anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, and maybe it does come from the sense of what we want to explore as authors, and we're all different people, right? Yes. I mean, all of my dark stuff is all about, coping with death and what's on the other side of death and beating monsters. And I quite like monsters and demons and, banishing demons and stuff. And it's weird because you come back to the same themes over and over again. And I mean, like there's a joke on your podcast that children in jeopardy, that's your dark trope that you just can't avoid.
Yeah, and that comes very much from, when I had a kid, I was suddenly very like it's something I never really thought about before. And then suddenly I was terrified, like all the horrible things that can happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like right now as we talk, climate change, Extinction Rebellion is a big fear amongst young people, all of us, but there is a lot of anxiety amongst young people, of course, because, we'll probably be dead and they'll be dealing with a lot of this stuff. And I almost think there is going to be a resurgence in the sort of environmental horror genre, which we saw around the millennium. Do you remember we had a lot of extinction movies and, climate change things really were coming up then. And I feel like that's going to come back. And as generations deal with their what is in their culture right now, that comes up in horror.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because in America, anyway, things are so polarized between, right wing and left wing. And while I see what you're saying, I think half the people would see that as some liberal agenda. Oh, you're putting climate change in my horror movie. Well, no, it's not real. And I refuse to see it. And they're one-starring movies before they even come out. And everything is so polarized that I don't know that these things have the power, at least here, to become a huge thing anymore without, half the country just decrying it as nonsense and ridiculing it and destroying it before it can even do well in a movie theater. Everything's so politicized. Yeah.
Well, what about then something like AI? We've seen AI is often artificial intelligence, in case anyone doesn't know, has come up in movies that could be called sci-fi, but actually, a lot of them do swing into horror. And I know you guys have written those out of Sterling and Stone as well. So, maybe that's a fear that is a kind of collective worry.
Yeah, that's something everybody can be afraid of.
Yeah.
Our robot overlords.
Our robot overlords. I guess what I'm saying is I think we write about, as you said, you write about dark things in order to understand how you're going to deal with them, or, facing your fear without really facing it, that kind of catharsis.
And originally, I think when I was a child, I talk a bit about this in the book. My obsession with things like slavery and the Holocaust and stuff. When I first learned about those, when I was young, I was a very happy-go-lucky, naive child, a lot like Sean is today. And when I first heard about, the slavery in the movie Roots, or the TV miniseries Roots, it horrified me, and I had to know everything I could because I wanted to know, how can people be so awful? Like what triggers them to do that? And for some of my stuff, it is trying to understand why people do the things they do. Like there is, monsters aren't born in a vacuum. They're created. And what happens that turns someone into a monster? What happens that, society overlooks things that are happening right beneath our noses? The Holocaust went on, and there were a lot of willing accomplices to that. And how does that happen? What the hell happens? And I've always tried to understand these things. And for me, horror is part of that. And not just horror, but writing dark fiction, thrillers, even our sci-fi. I'm always, dealing with some dark subject matter, trying to understand either outside forces or internal ones that motivate people to become what they are. And also the other side, like how does a person overcome the darkness, either within or without, outside of them? How do they extinguish that? How do they protect, the people in their lives? So it's all kind of related.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm similar in that way, and many of my books have a lot of religious history and Inquisition stuff, or dark things that have happened.
Fun
because of really fun.
Oh, like comedy.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, again, like you, I have to research these things and learn how could that have happened and why, to a point. But one of the things that's difficult when we research things, like I am a total research nut. So we actually just were in Lisbon in Portugal, and I stood in the square where they burnt all the Jews in one of these auto-da-fés, and it was kind of horrific to stand there in modern Lisbon, and this is something I'll be writing about, and I'm researching it. So how do we research things or try and write authentic characters, like authentic villains, and stop ourselves from getting really depressed or falling down into this dark hole?
Yeah, that can be difficult. I think one of the things that depressed me most, I was writing a book called Crash, and it's a story about a man that lost his child in a car crash, and he can't remember it, and he's obsessed with trying to recover his memories. So he drives around taking photos of car crashes and trying to trigger his own memories. And there's like a supernatural sort of element to it where he sees something in the photos, and that's like the cool part of the story. But when I was researching it, I lost my best friend in a car accident. I've been on scene in enough car accidents when I was walking, when I was skipping school one day in high school, and I was walking, and this girl was driving really fast and failed to turn, and she smashed into a pole, and I was like the first person there. Luckily, she was okay. Another time I saw, I was first on the scene. Well, me and my friend were first on the scene where this guy's truck was obliterated by these giant cement sewage pipes he was carrying, and he was crushed. And I went to the door to see if I could help him, and all I saw was blood coming out of it. But I hadn't seen a whole lot of, car accidents in the things you would like. I didn't take note of the things you would need to remember to write the book. So I went online and I went to some website where there was a video of this car crash somewhere in Europe. It was like 40 cars, and it was just somebody walking around with a camera, walking up to the people that were like dying in their cars, and they weren't helping them or anything. And I was just so horrified by it. And it's like, it's that thing that, it stays in your head and you wish you'd never seen it. It was like that. I was, trying to research or make my story authentic. And I just saw this, there's a person dying, and they're just looking down at them, and they walk on to the next one. And like, who is filming this? Are they a journalist? Why aren't they helping? I didn't get it. And it disturbed the hell out of me. But to answer your question, I have to take a walk. I can't do anything with that other than, put it in my story and try to process it and, try to find some ray of hope somewhere in the story. But the real world stuff, the real world bad stuff that, you come up with in your research and that you see in the news and all of that, it's hard. I got to take a walk and clear my mind. Otherwise it really weighs me down.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my normal life, like I don't watch, it's very hard for you Americans because you have TV news everywhere, but I haven't watched TV news in years. I mean, I just don't watch TV news, and we don't have it in our bars and things like you do in America. So
it's not a sport.
No, it does seem like that over there. Like it's can't Gladiator. Avoid it. It's kind of crazy, but I was wondering, because I find that once, if there's something I want to tackle and I tackle it and then I finish the book, and I do feel like, okay, I finished that book. And although the themes might come up again, I feel like part of it is left in the pages of that book. So does that happen to you?
Yes. Usually, yeah, what you said, if you write about it, you're kind of getting it down the page. A lot of times when I write something, I'm getting it out and it's out of my head. Sometimes it's a joke because I don't remember my own story. So yeah, that does help me. And, I've heard from readers that, stuff I've written has helped them get through tough times. And that means a lot to me. I would hate to write a book that was just so dark. It was stuck in someone's head and made them miserable and depressing. So I try not to do, really bleak endings. Short stories are a little different. You can do whatever.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But with a novel or a series, you don't want it to end with everybody dying. And you're like, why did I waste my time on this?
No, I mean, I agree with you. And I very much focus on that ray of hope. And I think Jonathan Maberry, whose books I love, horror writer, thriller writer, said his books are not about the monsters. They're about the people who fight the monsters, whether that's a human monster or whatever. And in your book, you say, another quote here, there should always be a flower pushing pushing through the cracked sidewalk. So how do we make sure there are rays of hope in our books?
You look for the things that survive the darkness, the things that bring us together. A lot of times, when horrible things happen in people's lives, they rally around each other, they help each other, or maybe they find some connection they didn't have before, like estranged, friends, lovers, siblings, or whatever. I think darkness in the world can bring us together if we allow it, and that has to mean something. That's it.
Yes, I'm leaving a dramatic pause. Yeah, and so I agree. I think we have to have that ray of hope, and also I feel like by winning in the book, it almost acts as like a talisman in the real world to say, look, my character, or whatever the character is, has won in the way that winning is in this particular book, whatever that means. And that's the triumph, is that you can go through this, but you can survive, or hopefully someone does.
Yeah. And like I said, when I was younger and, I was dealing with bullying and just a miserable existence as a child and teenager, the books did show me some ray of light. Even if they were fiction, they showed me that, someone wrote this book and they probably, had a bad time too, or the characters in them are maybe based on people somehow in their own life or whatever. I don't know. It just gave me a sense of hope that other people out there, have been through similar things and they found a way through it. And to me, that means a lot, because, we tend to get isolated. The more connected we are, the more isolated we feel. And sometimes it just helps to know that, somebody else has been through this, they got through this somehow, and that maybe you can get through it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do just want to mention, reading your book, and I know a bit about your story, and you have gone through some really awful things. And I was thinking about my life, and I've been through some stuff, but, I haven't been through what you have. And I wanted to say to anyone who's listening and they're like, do you know what? My life is great, but I still like horror. That's fine too. My mum always says to me, what did I do to you? And I'm like, Mum, it's not you. I think, I've been called an old soul. There are pictures of me as a very young child looking really old, because I've as long as I can remember, from my earliest memories, I've thought about death and dying, and the veil being thin and being on the other side of it, and just obsessed with this. These
so
topics.
You were a blast at children's birthday parties.
No, I never went. I'm an introvert. I don't want to go to parties. But it was, it's so interesting, and I just say that to my mum. I'm like, Mum, it's not you. It's just a thing in my head. It's fine. So she doesn't like to read some of my darker books, but I do want to switch. Because we're almost out of time, but I want to switch to you as a writer at this point in time. So you've obviously been co-writing now for pretty much a decade, and you and Sean and Johnny are still podcasting at the Story Studio podcast, and we've known each other online now for 10 years. And I wondered if you could maybe talk about, what are your thoughts right now as a mature indie in a space that just has been crazy change in the last 10 years?
It's ever shifting. It's, I hate to put a pin on anything because it changes tomorrow. I think all of us indies, we've stepped up our game. We're becoming more professional. Obviously audiobooks, really taken off. And TV rights, movie rights, all of that stuff. That is, that I think that's where the future is. People always read, obviously, but finding other places to put your stories and connect with people, that's a big thing. Personally, for us, we focused on, the smarter artist thing and doing the seminars and teaching and all that stuff. And that was never really my thing. Sean and Johnny, they love that. They like sharing their knowledge with the world. Now we've kind of shifted gears. We want to focus more on fiction. That's what we've been doing. Most of our, income comes from fiction now. We've invited other people into our studio, and instead of doing, courses and seminars and stuff like that, we're just releasing our stuff as, stone table books, stone tablet books are the smaller ones. That's what the Into the Darkness one is. It's one of them. So we're still like sharing the information that we have, but we're not letting it. I think before we let it take over more of our space than we wanted to. We want to focus more on fiction, and that's, we course corrected and did that, because I certainly don't like to spend all of my time teaching. I would way more like to just write my stories and, let the other stuff, do it in smaller increments. And that's why I did this one book. And maybe I'll do another book in another 10 years.
Another 10 years. Yeah. So you mentioned screenwriting there, and it's something I know you've been interested in a long time, and, you love movies and stuff. So how is that playing a part now for, are you turning your own books into scripts, or is that something you'd like to go into? Yeah.
Well, we sold Crash a couple of years ago, and I think it's being made into a movie. I don't know. It kind of like, if it happens, it does. If not, then I don't know. I guess we get the rights back after however many years. But yeah, we've definitely got in-house. We're producing a lot of scripts. We've got different people that we're in talks with, and different stuff in either in production, pre-production, or whatever. I don't know how much is out there, how much I can say. So,
sure.
But that is a huge focus for us, because we have so many stories. We're storytellers, and all of us, want to take that to the next level. For me, I've always wanted to write TV. That's movie would be fine, but I want to do TV. That's where my heart space is. And I don't think I will feel like content until I have a TV show that, is out there. And we've got several lines in the water.
Oh, cool. So did you write the adaptation of Crash as a screenplay?
No, I was involved in it. Sean and somebody else wrote that, and I was involved, and I went over it afterwards, because I don't really, not well versed in script writing. So I will. I've worked on a few with Sean, but he's way better at that than I am. So if I need to, I will. But mostly I focus on the story and in writing the books.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I agree with you. I mean, I think it's so funny, because I did a bit of screenwriter, did some courses, and I wrote a script that was for my Map of Shadows book, which is kind of dark fantasy, but it's actually split world, and it's got this massive universe. And I pitched it to an agent, and he said, it's really great, but it'll cost about 120 million to get made. Yeah. So no one's going to make that. And his number one suggestion was, can you please write just a small horror movie? Because that's the thing that's where everyone starts. And then
you write A Quiet Place.
Yeah. And then things kind of progress from there. So it's interesting, because what you've said about Crash, I haven't read that one, but is, a guy, it doesn't sound like big budget. It sounds like it could be quite small budget. And that it's so funny, because we never think about budget, do we, with books? But you have to think about it.
Actually, I did. Okay. The first series we did, well, we actually did Available Darkness first. So that doesn't kind of count. Yesterday's Gone was our first, serial that we did. That's huge budget. Whoever makes that is going to have to spend $1 billion. Okay, so it's our hottest series, but it's also it's like our Game of Thrones. Whoever buys it is probably going to have to spend a lot of money on it. So that's after that, though. Sean and I both started thinking, okay, let's think about, location. Let's think about, what the budget actually would be. And most of our books since then have been with the thought of, this could be done for less money. Like our White Space series, it all takes place on a small island off of Washington State. So that has very much been in my mind in a lot of our writing. That's like one of the only forward-thinking things I think that I've done.
Wow, that's so interesting. And it's funny, because every single idea, like I've got a list of things I want to write next year, and that just everything's big budget. I'm just like, stop it. What is wrong with you? But then, when we watch a movie on a Friday night, I just love big budget movies with lots of explosions and
yeah. I think for me, though, part of it is like I like those movies every now and then, but there's so many like if you take a movie like Independence Day, big alien invasion movie, or you take the movie Signs by M. Night Shyamalan. Signs was a much smaller movie about alien invasions, and I cared a hell of a lot more about those characters than anybody. I don't even remember anybody in Independence Day. So
Will Smith, surely.
I don't remember his character. I don't remember anything about him, but I remember everything about the characters in Signs. I think for me anyway, I mean, everybody's got different tastes. For me, I like a smaller cast of characters that I can care more deeply about. And that's kind of the stuff I write. Some of it's, big popcorn movie. Yeah, definitely. But I prefer the smaller set, more in depth with the characters sort of stories. And I think those translate to TV better in movies, at least, from a production standpoint.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And I think it's a great place to stop because, it is about who you are as a writer and what you want to create in your lifetime. So I'm glad that you decided to create Into the Darkness. I think it's a really useful book. So tell people where they can find you and your books and your podcast and everything you do online.
All right. Me, davidwright.com. That's my blog. For Into the Darkness, sterlingandstone.net/darkness. And for everything else for Stone Table and I think our podcast, everything, sterlingandstone.net/Stone Table, all one word.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Dave. That was great.
Thank you for having me. I hope to see you again in another, few years.
So I hope you found the interview with Dave useful today and that it gave you some ideas about how you could use the darker side of your history or personality in your writing and help others through sharing your truth. I know that self-censorship and fear of judgment is a real thing because I deal with it myself, but just start to push the boundaries a little and see how it goes. And of course, you can write stuff, you never have to publish it, but sometimes just writing it can help. So next week, I'm talking about how to sell more books with reader funnels with Mark Dawson. I also ask Mark about how he developed such self-confidence in his fiction, because he and I met when he was not the famous Mark Dawson. And I've seen him grow into the sort of publishing and business juggernaut that he is now, and it's super impressive. So I ask about self-confidence because it's something I know you might be surprised, but I still suffer with, and I know many people do. We also talk about why we think it's only day one for independent authors. Sometimes it seems that everyone knows about it, that everyone is an empowered creator, but not at all. And we've started to see some encouraging signs that the word is spreading, but the indie movement is still young, my friends. So do not despair if you feel like you're just starting out. I still feel like I'm just starting out because things change so much. And I'm still excited to be here, so I hope you will stay with me on the journey. So happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes, available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.